Hello friends, and welcome back to my YouTube channel where today I'm going to be walking you through the steps I took to make this set of dice inspired by Critical Role's Exandria. Specifically, the set was inspired by the smaller of the two moons, Ruidus, and I guess as a small spoiler for world lore from Campaign 3, beware if you don't want to hear about this, specifically through the mystical kind of red storms and power that Ruidus is associated with. I thought it would make a beautiful set of dice, and I am thrilled with the results. So let's get into how I made these. So to begin, these dice are made with blanks, so I'll be starting in my blank molds, prepping them with some, I believe this is called Angelina fiber. It's basically just tinsel. I get it from OOAK Artist Emporium, and I'm using a copper color here to contribute to the ruddy sky that is associated with Ruidus. So I'm just taking a couple of threads, like ideally fewer than 10 per die, which is much fewer than I would typically use for tinsel sets. And then I am just kind of slowly working every little piece of tinsel into the mold, hoping that it distributes kind of separately from each other to create this very thin strand of light in the dice. And once the molds were prepped, it was then time to, as always, divide out my resin, putting a very small amount to the side to be my clouds, and then a larger amount for the translucent sky. I'll be using the cloud technique that I use for all of my cloud dice. My last video was all about this technique. It is quite simple. To make the sky a little bit shiny, I'm doing 1 drop of Resin iridescent glitter, as always, a couple little taps of the Solar Color Dust Hyper Hollow Gold Flakes, gosh that's a mouthful of words, and then also a few taps of the Solar Color Dust Hyper Hollow Red Flakes as well. And as with most things dice related, I am just measuring with my heart here, tapping out what I feel like will be enough. I know that's not super helpful as an instructional, but I just kind of added as much as I thought would look nice. Then it is time to add our color to the sky. For this one we are doing black, so I started with just a single drop of Pinata's Manila Black ink. Some of the best advice I can offer you with resin is to always start with less and then know that you can add more later, which I actually end up doing with these colors here. But first we have to mix so that we can see what the color is looking like and then gauge whether we are happy for it. I wanted this to be a little bit darker, so I took a toothpick, and this is what I do when I'm trying to control how much ink I can get into dice. I'm just kind of slowly dripping on this toothpick and then using the toothpick to put in a much smaller drop of the alcohol ink than I would have gotten from the alcohol ink dropper directly. And once again, we mix, and then I'll be coloring the portion for my white, Pinata Blanco, as always. Once again, you should start small and then add more ink as you need, but I have a pretty good feel for how much white I need to use for my clouds, and I'm gonna mix that as well. Then it is time to pour. So I'm filling my molds maybe a third of the way with this resin, and then I'm going to be adding a drop of red alcohol ink on top of that. This is Pixis Mum. It's a very kind of ruddy red color, which is great for this set. I did 1 drop directly into my chunk and into my D20s, but I knew a full drop would overwhelm my smaller dice like the D6, D4, D10%, etc. So for those smaller dice, I'm going to be bringing back my toothpick technique, dropping a little bit of ink onto my toothpick and then using that to have a much smaller portion of ink go into the die than I would have if I just did it directly from the dropper. After dropping that red in, I'm going to do a little bit of a layer more black until my molds are about maybe 2/3 of the way full. And then we're doing some more red. So this is Pixis Garnet. It's a metallic alcohol ink, and I'm just going in and doing 1 drop into all of my dice except the oversized D20, which I did I think 3. And then I both wanted to give this ink a little time to set, and I also wanted to darken our sky color, so I added another drop of black here to that translucent dark sky, went ahead and used that dark black to cover the lids of my molds. This is a pretty important step for cap molds, at least as I have found with my blanks. So added some resin over there, set it off to the side, and then added a little bit more of that resin on top of all of my molds until they were about 3/4 of the way full. Before finally it was time to go in for the clouds. So as always, I let my pipette suck up some of that white, drop the pipette all the way down into the bottom of the mold, lift it up just a smidge, and then start to put pressure on it while I swirl it around the different dice molds to get my cloud effect. And as I like to say, it is simply just a matter of rinse and repeat from there until I can get all of the clouds into all of the different dice. Again, I have several videos, one that is entirely dedicated to this technique. It is pretty simple and it consistently gives me very beautiful cloudy sky looking dice. So I am obviously a fan. It does take a bit longer to do in these oversized D20s, but once those are all done, they went in the pressure pot, and then I got to demold them. This is what they looked like straight out of the pot. They were looking great, and then it's time to decorate. So again, I hadn't planned on filming this. I kind of did it last minute, so I had already prepped my decals, but I just covered these moons with a little bit of red leather paint, Angelus leather paint, which is what I use to paint my dice with. And that is how I made my little Ruidus moons for this set. So I plucked my red moons first and then put them over the parts of my dice with the least amount of red. I wanted this to kind of be in the quote-unquote clear sky portion, so the lower portion, not on the cap face of the die, but the bottom face, I suppose you could call it, just so that it would stand out the most and kind of look like that red storm was encroaching upon the moon. So I went ahead and placed all of my Ruidus moons, but I also wanted Catha, the second moon of Exandria, to be present as well, kind of more off to the side and being obscured by this incoming red storm. So I spent a while fiddling around with all of the dice, trying to figure out the happiest placement for the Catha moon. For all of them, I ended up setting them like just along the edge where that red was really starting to come in. And then I also added some of these lovely little foggy cloud details. Once again, just with the goal of it looking like this moon was being obscured by the clouds and the incoming storm. And then all that was left to do to kind of finish decorating them. I was really happy with the way they looked plain, so I didn't want to obfuscate or obscure any pretty parts of the set. So I kind of kept to just those foggy looking clouds rather than those clouds that you can see with the more stark and noticeable white lines. And then I also added just a little star or two to each of them because I thought it was cute. And proceeded to follow all of those steps with all of the dice. First finding a little spot for Catha, then adding a couple little foggy clouds, not too many, I didn't want them to cover a bunch of the dice, and then placing a little starburst or two, just to tie everything together and really push home that sky appearance. Once they were all done, it was then time to cast. You can't really see any of the details here, but you get the idea. I did them all. Then it was time to put them in my dice molds. As always with blanks, I degas my resin as well as I can, fill my molds about 1/3 to 1/2 of the way full, and then just go ahead and pop all of my blanks in. For this set, I specifically wanted Ruidus, the red moon, to be on the high face of the die, which is the bottom face of my molds, which can be a little tricky, especially with dice like the D20, because they really like to roll when I push them into my molds. But luckily, for the full set, I was able to position them so that Ruidus, the red moon, was on the high face of each of these dice. However, for the oversized D20, it did indeed roll like crazy, and that didn't happen, but that was okay because it still looks gorgeous. Then another day-long trip to the pressure pot they go, and it is time to demold. Starting with the oversized D20, you could see that the red moon did not end up on the high face, it's over on the 18, but that is totally okay. You can see Catha here hanging out in a corner, and just that gorgeous red storm encroaching upon the sky. I think they look great. Next up, it is time to demold the full set of dice, and unlike the oversized D20, these fellas are coming out of nice, new, very shiny molds, so I was incredibly excited to take a look at them. And boy, oh boy, did they come out just exactly how I was hoping they would. You have that base of the dark sky with a little bit of reflect from those gold and red flakes. You can see the threads of that copper film that we put in as well, kind of trailing throughout. The white decals like the Cathamoon, the clouds, and the starburst all show up nice and clear, but they don't obscure any of the important, well, what I find important, parts of the dice. And then, of course, that red, that ruddy red with the shimmer from that metallic ink. And gosh, I don't talk up my sets all too often, but I'm just over the moon. But I am just over the moon, so happy with how this set came out. I think it is beautiful. I am also very much betting that I will never be able to bring myself to ink this set. Or if I do decide to ink it, it is certainly going to be agony trying to decide on a color. But none of that really matters. That is a problem for future me to worry about at some future time. As for present me, all I really have left to say is that was the video. If you liked this video, consider leaving me a like. If you want to see more videos like this, feel free to check out my video history and subscribe for videos in the future. And if you have an idea for a video that you would like to see, I would love to hear about it down in the comments. And as always, I hope that you enjoyed, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!